A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. Everything is a story. The narrators of stories that shape our theology and community always narrate from their own location. For example, the Black church of my youth, the story of Moses was told as part of Black freedom struggles towards human dignity, struggles that conscientiously moved away from the pervasive white supremacy, violence, and control. Never mind, Moses was a Middle Eastern man whose descendants today participate in various forms of oppression, like the occupation of Palestinians in their own homeland, and in the form of anti-Black racism in North America, because you know, Black Lives Matter. Still, in Black religious communities, we accepted that story as a reflection of our lives collectively. So much so that we were not afraid to cast it in the guise of a woman. The great Harriet Tubman was named Moses. So what is today's story? What is the story of Muslim Eid al-Adha? While preparing these notes, I already saw a few posts online that confirmed the tendency to shape this story only in its most patriarchal narrative, that this day is only about Ibrahim and his son Ishmael upon the to-be peace. How easily Muslims forget about Hajj. How do we cast the story of Hajj in such a way that she is the narrator of her own experience, the writer of her own story? First, let me tell you what I mean by patriarchal narratives. The year I had a position at Harvard University as a research scholar in the Divinity School, I did not find a Muslim community or mosque convenient for the whole of that year. Still, I made an effort to just attend for the 2 Eid. On Eid al-Adha, I selected a random place near enough to where I was living, a mosque in Quincy, Massachusetts. In his Eid khutbah, the male imam went on ad length about the power provoked in an image in his story of Ibrahim alayhi salam as a man who circumcised himself without anesthesia. He was not talking to me. Although ostensibly this was a family occasion with others than just cis men. Let's face it, centering the sacred celebration around the story of male genitalia was seen as appropriate in this public performance, even while it meant closing off, making invisible, inaudible, inconsequential those of us who do not have the same genitalia. Let me just stop right here to note that my having pointed this out can now be used as fodder to cast me as deviant, because the onus on my having pointed it out is more important than having that be the story in the first place. That was 1999. Before that, in the year between 1993 and 1994, the United Nations designated the Year of the Family. Coincidentally, this was 1 year before the Beijing Conference on Women, and in the same year that I would first be invited to embody an ethics of gender inclusion in Islamic ritual by giving a Friday khutbah. Many of us would question who defines family here. How is family defined, and whose families are left out or made subaltern in these definitions? I mean, you can't just say family and presume everyone experiences these the same way. Sure enough, the popular idea about family that was being promoted was in line with the nuclear family, a patriarchal institution in which a man takes a woman as wife. She performs reproduction and she provides free care for the children, the household, and the man. For this, she's given an honor. However, any kind of family beyond this has no honor. Thus, myself, as a single parent to 5 children, who at the time held a job in a profession, i.e. academia, that expected me to render those children invisible and inconsequential in order to meet the standards of that profession. I also continued, as I do today, to perform volunteer services for Muslim communities locally and internationally, virtual and in embodied terms. Still, it would be that same community that would castigate me for having the audacity to survive without a husband. Let me express this more succinctly. I was both father and mother to 5 souls. Each of these souls have and still continue to conceive of me and my parenting and my struggles as only important to the extent to which it fulfills their fantasy of what is a good mother. So a good mother must be both ensure that material needs are met, but to act as if they materialize by magic and not by effort in sometimes hostile outside conditions called the professional world. She must defer all of her spiritual well-being and the effort it takes to maintain them to the whims of those children and their wants, no matter how small or large, because at no point are those wants expected to be deferred, or I am also seen as failing. Meanwhile, the parts of me that must perform as father are resented, often even more than the absent father is, because these parts are seen as incongruent with being the good mother. I must nurture and set boundaries at one and the same time, knowing that together these are in contradiction, further spoiling the term mother. Between these 2 years, 1994 and 1999, I began in earnest to read, research, reflect, and reconstruct the story of our mother, Hajar, upon her be peace. In addition to public lectures around the world, I would compose the longest chapter in my second book, Inside the Gender Jihad, with the title, Towards a New Hajar Paradigm. Fast forward another decade, and some Takfiri trolls and other so-called Muslim leaders would decide that 3 words about Abraham, alayhi salam, written in a sentence that forms a rhetorical question near the end of a short blog, that the blog itself was not about Ibrahim in the first place, but that was fodder to denounce all of my faith. Keep in mind, this blog was about Hajar, and it was specifically after my experience of the Hajj. Furthermore, while it was not about Ibrahim, alayhi salam, that rhetorical question near the end literally included Sarah in its questioning, the wife of Ibrahim, and it also included God, Allah. But none of these would matter as much as Ibrahim, alayhi salam. To this day, after more than 25 years on the story and related themes of Hajar, I have never written about Ibrahim. He is not the center of the stories that I tell. So despite the fact that 3 words about him is seen by enough such patriarchal readers as all that matters in all those 25 years, I point to this process as a clear confirmation that only certain stories or narratives matter in the patriarchal reading. Those who confer that only patriarchal narratives matter by then erasing the sum total of my Islam, my scholarship, my life, my right to speak, not only on behalf of Hajar, but also from a perspective intimately aligned with hers. These are not the topics of this good book. Hundreds of thousands of words of soul search and countless hours of research across time gets reduced to 3 words about a person I have never even written about. It simply shows what an imperative it is that we continue to look again and again at the story of Hajar, anew and from afar. We must reflect and critique the tendency to focus on him and him alone, not his wife Sarah, and not even God in that same sentence. Because it is pretty clear how patriarchal reading and storytelling has removed the story of Hajar from our Eid al-Adha and Hajj celebrations. So let's go back to the story of Hajar. I will tell this story. It is a story about an aging couple, a wise patriarch and a barren old woman who, having accepted their failed reproduction and thus the absence of an heir to their household, availed themselves of a young slave girl as surrogate. In this telling of the story, we keep in mind that such a quest is centered on fertility. We can thereby imagine certain things about this slave girl. Number one, she's probably a virgin, because who wants to complicate matters by having her already within the range of sexual maturity and experience? Number two, she is probably young and healthy. Let's be frank. Child marriage would not be recognized as a form of statutory rape until our current generation. Another matter from the past that today we cast as evil without hesitation, because our moral compass did not stop working as we gather new information and evidence from lived realities about the harm in the practice of the so-called child marriage. That it still goes on and is, in fact, is sanctioned in certain rural parts of the world, Muslim and non-Muslim, means that reflection on the story of Hajar habitually erases her age to sanction the story only from the perspective of the patriarch, the patriarchal family, and their quest for a male heir. So she was probably a teenager, inexperienced and without agency or consent. Let me repeat that part. Inexperienced without agency or consent. Because in my research and discussion, I often come across Black storytellers, Christian and Muslim, who try to clean up the matter of lacking consent by saying that there was some kind of marriage between her and Ibrahim, alayhi salam. Come on. This is the same kind of consent or marriage that my ancestors from Africa experienced when enslaved in the Americas, and which today leaves my DNA with a higher percentage of Irish blood than of all the other parts of my African ancestry. I don't know why the illusion that they were married plays so heavily in Black narratives of the Hajar story, but just because there is no record of her lack of consent allows us to ignore how important is consent when we talk about sexual intimacy. As a slave and a child, she probably had no idea that such a thing as consent mattered. It does. She was selected from amongst other slave women. They probably would not select a woman who already had children. That's too complicated. The underlying idea here was total possession of whatever child or children she would bear, to be absorbed into the patriarchal household to which she was taken for surrogacy. Her life and her progeny belonged to that household with no moment of her consent. Keep that in mind. Her innocence was in their favor because this was a relationship of instrumentality. They were seeking a healthy young surrogate for the purpose of reproduction for the household. Still, and this for me is where the story gets most interesting, Hajar complies with all these external mandates. As such, according to Islamic law, she and her child are supposed to be cared for as the household is cared for, and they both are on the road to manumission because a mother of a child, due to sexual intercourse with her master, is granted freedom so long is granted freedom as long as they wait for his death. At least that's what's there in Islamic law. My interest in this story is about who provides. Hajar and the child Ismail were supposed to be provided and cared for all the days of their lives. This is not in keeping with being walked in the desert and abandoned there without even enough water to survive. In the Muslim historical narratives of storytelling, she becomes mistress of the springs of Zamzam, and through her authority over this most precious resource, water, in the desert, she is then adopted into a local tribe. Okay, that works, sorta. But what my imagination has trouble with is that given the easy presumption that she was a very young woman while all this other stuff was going on, that she is, therefore, she would be prime pick relative to the quest of reproduction and fertility in Abraham's patriarchal household. So why would she never marry or even marry again and have more children? Sometimes then I give a different imagined backstory. In my imagination, Hajar, the mistress of the well, gets to marry by choice. She gets to experience what it is like to actually be in an intimate relationship of consent. Further, I imagine her giving birth to a daughter, a younger sister to Ismail, who grows up seeing what life is like for her elder brother because of his peculiar dad and the one who abandoned him and his mother. This sister has no holds over her to keep with this trumped up patriarchal narrative that does so much to erase Hajar, her enslavement, her youth, her lack of consent, and her abandonment, because as that blog entertained, this is not beholding of the benevolent God. And the only way we can believe in God is as if we are completely devoid of choice and agency, so must simply give up in total submission. That's why I never use the word submission for Islam. I use engaged surrender. We surrender to Allah, but we do so with the engagement of our agency. We obey, comply, and serve with choice and with consent. That leads me to a third and final theme. Who will speak for the motherless child, the parentless orphans, the childless couples, whether by choice or coercion? Who will recognize the mandate for chosen families over birth families? And not just who will speak, who will listen and learn? I would like to suggest that this can start by the reading and telling of stories centered on queer Muslim localities within the patriarchal hegemonic binary telling of sacred stories. So before I conclude, I want to tell you why queer stories figure so prominently for me. First, let me remind you, when or how will all stories matter? Year after year, we witnessed the telling of the story of Hajj minus any consideration of this noble woman, Hajar, and her survival with her child. A woman who experienced sex without consent and a family that abandons. Deadbeat dad, violent co-wife, all with a baby at the breast. Who is the Allah of these stories? If the woman has no voice, no face, made visible, no care for her survival, and yet who ran 7 times for her child, while no one else did? I think we get a clue when we look to see who answered. It was the divine feminine, the split open of the very earth beneath the desert upon which Mother Hajar ran. Or they say the water started to flow at the feet of her nursing son. This water that sprang forth is clean, drinkable water from the heart of the earth in the middle of the desert. Water of life. Water is life. Water sustains. Water provides us a resource, not only for her and the child, but for all of us, for every generation that travels to that dusty spot, even today. These days, we run in an air-conditioned pavilion, and where the story marks her running, the builders of that pavilion, the Saudi government, takes away from us the right to live as embodied Hajar. The signs that mark the place where Hajar, the woman, ran also state that women are prohibited from running. This was the motivation behind my blog, in which I asked the rhetorical question. At that place between the hills of Safa and Marwa, I have been told my life does not matter, and the life of our mother does not matter. It marks the place where we might begin to tell a story that challenges the rubric of patriarchal storytelling that seeks to erase what it must have meant when Hajar was frantic in her search, and so she ran. Because this is not the only place where women are prohibited in performing the Hajj. Women are prohibited from turning where they stand when the adhan for prayer doing tawaf around the Kaaba, circling counterclockwise, as if we are planets circling around our sun. Instead, when the adhan is called, women are shoved, I mean literally, by both male and female hands. We are pushed to one or two cordoned off sections constructed like contemporary animal pens, if you will. Only there are we permitted to pray. So while women make up at least half of the ummah, these pens are smaller than 1/20th of the platform or courtyard upon which the Kaaba stands. We are further excluded from praying anywhere on the entire first floor of Masjid al-Haram, except at the only part of the mosque from where the Kaaba cannot be seen, doorway number 89. Even as many of the doors of the mosque have names, this one is nameless. It is the only place where women are permitted to pray on the first floor of the main mosque. As we travel to Medina to Nabi, the city of the Prophet, Medina, women are denied the opportunity to give our salams to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to receive his in return, because access to his grave and of the two companions that are with him is also prohibited to us, no matter our goal or expectation. Make no mistake how all of this is linked to ignoring and erasing Hajar, denying women the full right of participating in the rites of Hajj by a combined nefarious plan that means at the ethical and theological level that access even to their patriarchal notion of Allah is limited to men. They, and they alone, have the authority to tell everyone else how much of Allah we have access to and who belongs to this Islam. That is why I must retell the story of Hajar from a radical inclusive perspective. That is why I must risk further ostracization if need be, because the implication of criticism against standard patriarchal modalities and even benevolent patriarchs is acted upon as if such patriarchs and patriarchal rubrics are all that matter. Exclusion from them warrants attack and counterattacks. But I will resist that reading of my faith, of my Lord Allah, my prophets, upon them be peace, and my mother Hajar. So before I close, I share with you how I came to confirm my negation of such a reading in most recent years. To do so, I must tell another story. The story of the virtues of queer sacred spaces. I have experienced this in these times. In the past 2 decades, we have evolved loving spaces in the worship of Allah that invokes the full humanity of all persons and all bodies. Spaces like the Unity Mosque in Toronto, the Inclusive Mosque Initiative of UK, or El Ghurba or South Africa, or the Inner Circle, or Muslims for Progressive Values. In these spaces, we not only do not invoke hierarchy beyond Allah over certain bodies, we instead invoke full equality of all humankind. So, I wish to give my gratitude to queer Muslim communities for the transformation that has been, for me, great in these days. Thank you for showing everyone how it is to love Allah even when certain other parts of the so-called Muslim community have shown only hate, pretending that such could be in the name of Allah. Thank you for leading me to the understanding of what it must have been like for visitors to the Prophet Lut, carrying the divine light when they were met with others who had already been subjected to their wills in the town in the form of sexual violence, hate, and trolling. Once again, in the name of so-called community. Thank you for showing up. If you build it, they will come, I like to say. After these 2 decades of creating inclusive spaces, you have helped to deconstruct false notions of authority and rigid formulas of spiritual devotion, paving the way even for the women's mosque movements. Thank you for deciding that those rendered invisible matter, that Black lives matter, that queer bodies matter, that love wins, that Hajar is our mother and we will never abandon her in our struggle to reclaim family as an institution of love and care. Thank you for treating love and care as a priority over other formulas and intent regarding family. Thank you for modeling what for me and for others these many years has come to mean that you are my community. You are my life. You are my water in the desert. You are my sign or ayah of the divine. So yes, I thank you. Every day, and especially on this day as we return to think about Hajj and Hajar in the time of Corona. Stay blessed. Keep to the sacred light of love and grace. Thus, I will end here by reminding us that we are experiencing global protest and resistance. In addition to the Black Lives Matter movements, there are protests worldwide. Who is the God of the protesters? It cannot be that God that sits static on the stone throne with flowing white hair and white skin. I don't think so. The God of these protests is my God, the one who is the resistance itself, learning to talk back to themes that have robbed us of our humanity. By our resistance, we establish better human beings by putting the highest moral standards back on the table with Allah. Allah who gives us the divine breath of life that grows in us for learning and change, not for us to become compliant, obedient slaves in the way the story of Hajar is often blindly cast, or even that story of Abraham. He was not ordered to sacrifice his firstborn, Ismail, alayhi salam. The Quran says he said, I saw in a dream. Well, what? So God had to save his sorry ass from following up on that whim. Thus, I do not take for granted that a woman denied agency in every important thing in her life up to the moment that her plight is finally captured for posterity in the form of the search for life, for water, and the wells of Zamzam. All of a sudden, we can only talk about her story if we cast this as an act of surrender before a God who is putting her faith on trial. I'm not buying that. Instead, I buy into an ethic that says, if oppression and discrimination is lauded in an abusive language claiming to be God, then that makes God complicit with abuse. We must change that complicity with language about the loving God, who figures in these stories not only by saving Abraham's sorry ass before he kills his child, but also by making a way for this abandoned woman and her nursing child. That loving God of wisdom and gentle care, who gave to our mother Hajar a divine feminine gift, clean water in the desert. May our cups overflow with this sacred feminine. Thank you very much.